And good afternoon, good morning, 11:15, good morning. My name is Greg Niemeyer. I'm the director of the Berkeley Center for New Media, and I'd like to thank the Regents Lecture Committee for inviting Brewster Kahle to be our speaker. Also, I would like to thank Laura Wolf from the Berkeley Center for New Media for organizing this fabulous event and for supporting the whole visit of Brewster Kahle's. It's my honor to introduce Brewster today, and I see you're already here, so if I make any mistakes, please let me know.
Yes.
And also I want to acknowledge Mary, who's Brewster's partner, who's here as well, and let's keep this all flowing forward. So there's a few things we know about Brewster Kahle, and I'm testing you because I know he's so famous, we just need to do the test, right? You already studied up on this, and we just need to do the test. So let's see, which of these companies did Brewster not help create? Alexa, Thinking Machines, BitTorrent, Archive.org, Waze Inc., Amazon.com, and Google.com. Which ones don't belong? You can search it and find out real quick. Right. Obviously, Alexa is the company he started in 1996 that did web analytics. Thinking Machines is the company he was associated with when he graduated from MIT in 1982. And that was a supercomputer company. And then BitTorrent, I don't think you had anything to do with. Archive.org, you had everything to do with. It's a very important website, and it's the site where the history of the web is stored, and where the web maybe at some point will become aware of itself and its own history, which is a key part of awareness, right? Waze Inc. is a very interesting company that was at the very dawn of the internet, a search engine that claimed to bring up the most relevant pages. Does that sound familiar? The most relevant pages ranked by relevance, and so that was a concept that Google later on built on, but there was, I don't think, any direct relationship between the two. Nope. And then, of course, Amazon.com acquired Alexa, and Alexa provided the foundation to Amazon's web analytics. A very exciting page in history. And another test here is Brewster Kahle a member of these organizations? Which one is he not a member of? Internet Hall of Fame, yes. American Academy of Arts and Sciences, yes. National Academy of Engineering, yes. Electronic Frontier Foundation, yes. Public Knowledge, yes. National Data Information Infrastructure Program of the Library of Congress, absolutely, and finally National Science Foundation Advisory Committee for Cyber Infrastructure. So you're tapped into all these really important organizations. But let's see what's happening today with Alexa. So if we look at Alexa, it has a page rank mechanism still, and it tells us how important a page is, and it tells us that the global and United States rank of Google is 1. It's the most highly ranked website in the world. And that doesn't come as a surprise. It has been one for a long time. It just sits there. That's a very uninformative graph. Let's look for more information. How popular is Berkeley? We're ranked 1,556, and that makes us 530 in the United States. And the interesting is we're a seasonal company, right? It's kind of like Tahoe. Like Tahoe, we have our high season and our low season. It doesn't sync up quite with the snow, but almost. And the reason why it syncs up is because people really want to know about applying to college and then whether they got in or not, right? And so those are two moments in the life of the university where we get a lot of traffic. But even more interestingly, we're looking at a self-reflexive moment. How popular is archive.org in the eyes of Alexa? And we see that it's ranked 262, which is a factor 5 better than UC Berkeley. So we have a lot to catch up with and a lot to learn from you, clearly, maybe today even. And
but please use us more. Right, because we're obviously going
see, we have to get it is minus 24, so we have to work on this. Yeah. That's maybe why you came, because you have to. Okay, so but that's a great moment when you have your own products reflecting on each other, and that's a moment when your own work sort of becomes aware of itself. And this has a long history. It goes way back to this Wayback Machine, which reveals this article from 1996, a big year in your life, where you were interviewed to talk about Waze. And in that article in 1996, it's actually a really good article, and it's still interesting. 1996 was a time when people like CEOs could actually say things that were relevant, and they didn't have to check with their PR department first. And so you said a whole bunch of interesting things there that are still interesting today, among which you said, okay, just to put us in context, this is what the web looked like in 1996. And this was the commonplace website above and the exciting one with PDF below, you see? You see how photography in space is all laid out with a nice typography? That was exciting at the time. What else was exciting is what Brewster Kahle said then. which is that AOL's interest in Waze, AOL was acquiring Waze at the time, is in pushing open technologies as a hedge against upcoming proprietary systems. So in 1996, 20 years ago, you already were speaking about how the internet needs to be open. And the amazing thing is, while the graphics changed, we still talk about how the internet needs to be open. So let's have that conversation. Please help me welcome Brewster Kahle.
Gosh, thank you very much. Let me just set up for a moment. Whoop. All right.
Good.
So this has been a fantastic week. I'm getting to spend all of this week here at Berkeley. Thanks to Michael and Laura in terms of setting up a schedule of speaking opportunities. Tomorrow I'll speak on the right to remember for the Regents lecture. But this is a different conversation, and I'd say it's much more of a conversation, and there's going to be time at the end to try to talk about it. It's a call, if you will. It's not a declaration that this exists. This is I think we can build this if we work together. I want to basically talk about locking the web open. Can we do that? We've spent the last 25 years pouring a tremendous amount of us into this infrastructure, which is the World Wide Web. Our thoughts, our dreams, our institutions, our journal literature, all sorts of things are going into this web. But as one of my heroes put it, code is law. The way the World Wide Web is implemented, the code of the World Wide Web, determines a lot of how we live our lives online. And so if that's true, you'd want the code to go and reflect who we are and who we want to be. So you'd want it to have some of our basic principles of universal access to all knowledge, or freedom of expression involved, or privacy, or different mechanisms of working together. But actually, the World Wide Web has almost none of that embedded in it, and it's becoming quite clear that we actually have quite a problem on our hands. So the World Wide Web isn't private, it isn't secure, it isn't reliable yet, but it is big. And one thing that we know about the Internet Archive is just sort of a little bit of the dynamics of the overall Internet that's going on out there. We crawl at about 1 billion pages every week. There are hundreds of millions of active websites. It's an enormous collection of materials. But we found that it's also massively available in a way that it wasn't when I was growing up. You could go and get access to all sorts of things all over the world, except if you're in China, where you can't get access to anything on the Internet Archive. I think because there are a few videos on the Internet Archive that the Chinese government doesn't like, so they black out all of it, and the New York Times and all sorts of other things. We're also blacked out currently in Russia, as well as a lot of other websites. So the World Wide Web isn't available to everybody. But it's really great that you can go and look around for all sorts of information that you don't, want to tell your colleague necessarily that you don't know, right? That you can go and sort of search around and play around out on the internet and go and do things that might be a little naughty, or go and research some things that you're supposed to have known quite a while ago and you don't. And you're just really comforted that it's all very accessible and very private. Except we now know, well, it isn't. that actually we have built the largest surveillance network that's actively on all the time that we've ever seen in the world before. The Snowden, some of the Snowden documents yielded a couple articles that I found particularly frightening, which was the WikiLeaks website was watched by GCHQ, which is the NSA of the UK. And they basically recorded all of the IP addresses, traced it back to where they are and who they are, because IP addresses are largely personally identifiable. And they tracked those people, and they handed them to the Americans, to the NSA, who selected these folks for advanced levels of watching. That basically the reading behavior of a website that wasn't illegal to read was used as a mechanism of selecting and watching people in the United States. Library World has had a long and dark history interacting with those that round up people for what it is they've read and selecting them for advanced operations. And so we know that this is a problem and sort of a big red flag. So reader privacy is kind of a problem. So we have a web that is not very reliable. We have a web that is not very private, but we do have one that's fun, right? I think the thing that we've really gone and done well is made a malleable, weird kind of environment that people can add things to without asking permission, and it's just this bizarro, really fun place. So out of the big 3 checklist items that I think we'd want in the web infrastructure, I think we've got only one of the 3. So it's not reliable, it's not private, and it's not, but it is fun. I'm going to suggest that we can go and get 3 check marks if we do our game right in this next round. And I would suggest it's time to build another round of the World Wide Web. And it would be fundamentally a distributed web. So what do I mean by distributed web? Well, you think, well, it's distributed already. It's all over the place. But it's not distributed in the same sense as the internet. So the internet is a distributed system, a series of pipes out there, tubes, in that you can nuke any part of it and it will still work. That basically if there are parts of the internet infrastructure, as long as you don't take out too much of it or segment it completely, the actually internet routing will go and get your way there. I asked Vint Cerf how long it took to go and try to get that part of it working, and he said it took about a year in a room with about 5 smart guys, I think they were all guys, in Southern California, trying to debug how do you make a distributed system. A distributed system is harder. So the World Wide Web isn't a distributed system in the sense that if you take out any particular website, piece of hardware, that website will blink off the air. Or if you surround it and go and watch all the traffic in and out of it, you can go and prevent people from getting there or watching all the people that get to it. So it's centralized in the sense that there are single points that are not able to be swapped out, and you'll decrease functionality. It's all another distributed system, I would say, is kind of like the Amazon.com cloud as it is evolving. The Amazon.cloud is made up of data centers all over the world. And if you pay enough money, you can have your website migrate towards its users. So your website becomes punchier and faster the more it's used by people in particular parts of the world. If some particular piece of hardware goes down, it shifts it seamlessly to another computer. So it's a reliable infrastructure that goes and shares it. What if we could go and build a World Wide Web that's like that? That basically would migrate towards the users and be able to go and be resilient against hardware. That would be pretty nifty. What if we built reader privacy in from the start? What if we really tried to make it so that what it is you're looking at and reading isn't easily, at least, gone to find out what it is that you are reading? And when I'm growing up with books, writer privacy was hard And reader privacy was easy because you just have a book and you sort of pass it around. But actually, reader privacy on the internet, I think, is going to be harder than writer privacy. But I still think it's quite important. If we're really going to rethink this World Wide Web thing, let's build in reliability and resilience from the beginning. The Wayback Machine is kind of a kludge. It takes snapshots from the outside of a website and just records what it is that it looked like. It doesn't take a snapshot of what it is or how it works. And also, it's not all that blended into the internet, so that if you hit a 404, you have to know, oh, I need to go and copy my URL and go over here and plug it in here, and maybe it's there. And that's just not good enough. It's not a reliable system. What if the World Wide Web worked a little bit more like, say, Git, or some of these systems that have lots of versions, and there are versions every step of the way. So if you want to roll back history, you can look at the past versions of a website. Wouldn't that be nifty? So we'd have a time axis, if you will, and you could fork websites to be able to be moved around. And another wish list thing that I think we got wrong is we didn't put in a business model into the web very well. We've got a system now that makes it so that you can't, it's pretty much ads, and they have their problems because it's usually a winner-takes-all type environment. What if you could make it so that it would be a lot easier to go and make it so that you could publish? Sounds all very good. Okay, so this is the wish list. What tools do we now have that Tim Berners-Lee didn't have to play with back 25 years ago? The first off actually is encryption. There was encryption back then, but it was not legal to distribute. When Vint Cerf, again, said that when he was designing the internet protocols, he thought it was all going to be encrypted, except the United States government made it so that you couldn't export that. So basically, the internet didn't have encryption built in, and the World Wide Web didn't either. But there's some other things that are going on that are really kind of amazing toolkit abilities we have. We have JavaScript. And so JavaScript is this scripting language that is now amazingly powerful, where you download code that runs on your own computer in a secure way. We've got blockchain and Bitcoin that might be able to be helpful towards having global databases that are distributed as well as potentially a billing type system. So, well, none of this is all that new, going and saying, wow, gosh, Brewster's come up with all this new stuff. It's like, no, there's lots of other people that are working on this, but they're mostly in the shadows. There's Maelstrom by BitTorrent, which is a web browser that can go and source your website off of a BitTorrent. So BitTorrent can have your website, all the files of your website in it, and that can live in lots and lots of places, and there's a browser that can pull web pages from BitTorrents. So then that means that the website doesn't actually live on a server. It lives on lots of people's computers being served to the other people that are reading that website. Kind of cool. I actually got my own blog to work in that environment, and which is kind of fun. There's MadeSafe, there's Namecoin, there's Bitcoin, there's IPFS, which is very promising. There's there's a lot of these different systems, but mostly they're kind of academic or small grassroots folks. I'm hoping that we can go and lift up and cherry pick from some of these technologies to build a better web that is compatible with the old web. So why don't we start with a bold goal? What if we said, okay, let's try to build something that would be really fun and useful enough that people would kind of get it, but it would have to be smooth and easy. What if we could build a WordPress but distributed? So WordPress, it's easy. You can go on to WordPress.com. You can go and say, I want to start up a new blog, and it says, sure. And it just allows you to go and set up a blog, and you get to pick your templates. You get to pick if there are other people that are going to have admin privileges. There's, you can pick your theme and those sorts of things. What if we could do that, and that easily, and that usefully, but in a distributed way that has these other principles of reader privacy, reliability, even getting paid for distributing some of your work through it. What would it take to do it? What I would suggest is we need these check logs. If we have checks on these technologies as part of a WordPress, then we'd have done it. We're going to need it to work in a normal browser. So your phone could, if it's going to a distributed website, you wouldn't know the difference. You would just go to a website that one might be distributed, and so it works compatibly with the existing world. We want good names so that you're not typing these things that look like BitTorrent hashes. So it might be brewstersblog.nl. We want it snappy performance, so it's really good. We want it to be fun and easy to use. We want it malleable so that you can go and do new and different things. We want user identities, but in a distributed way. And if we get extra bonus points if we can build it to have an archive built into it. And make it have points. So this is, I'd say, that from an engineer's perspective, if we can get check marks. And I'm going to go through each one of these and try to explain why I think each one of these is doable. But the basic picture is, I think that we could build a WordPress-like functionality, a new web that at least has that kind of functionality so people can go and build their own websites for their own communities that have these new principles. So I'm going to go through these, and it's going to get a little bit technical. One of the ahas for me over the last year was going and seeing an IBM PC boot in my browser. So the Internet Archive took a bunch of these old MS-DOS programs and Commodore and Atari 64 programs that were in binary, and got a different community's emulator and cross-compiled the emulator into JavaScript, so you can go to archive.org, click on a button, and it boots an IBM PC in your browser, and then it loads a virtual floppy, and it runs Oregon Trail. And it's just like, it just seemed kind of magic to me that you can download and run a computer that was current 15 or 20 years ago. That ability of sort of moving things around means that the browser can be a compute platform to be able to do this work. Also, they've made changes so that a browser can talk to another browser without going to a server. So we have the peer-to-peer mechanism, and people are now able to do things like BitTorrent-like things just among people using the net. So you don't have to go to a source. You can just pull information from others. So that is now doable. Oh, and I'll give a straw man's demo of a piece of this. So there is a system called IPFS, which is the Interplanetary File System, and it's a peer-to-peer file system. And I worked with Juan Bennett, the founder of that, and he took my blog and moved it into this space so that it's being served from nowhere and everywhere. So it's and I'm going to do that sort of thing you're always trained not to do in front of people, is try to do a live demo. So if this works, you're going to have to applaud. If it doesn't work, then forget that I tried. Okay, so this is a URL. Click on it, and there it is. It came up. Okay. So what is this? This is my dopey WordPress blog. And it's got this URL that's at the top. Oh, it's really low res here. Is a IPFS handle. And it has used a computer program running on my computer to ask the world, where are the components to make up this web page? And it's running, it even has a search engine. So if I search on Lessig, it is actually searching real time on my blog because I've taken my search engine of my blog posts and made it into JavaScript, and it's running in my browser. So it's a functioning website that was just downloaded as files into my browser, and it runs. And so what I'm trying to do here is, if I'm starting to lose you, is to try to show that each of the pieces of this are doable. You can go and distribute files from everywhere and nowhere, and be able to make something that looks like and acts like a blog. So if I go and click around, it's pretty snappy, even though it's going out to, let's see if this even works. Yes. Creating free and open societies. So anyway, so this is a website that is working off of the cloud quite literally. There is no point that this thing is actually coming from. This is a normal old Firefox browser that is just running web pages that are sourced from basically a peer-to-peer network. So it's a peer-to-peer web server approach. And so instead of my going and saying, I want to have it on WordPress.com, I might say, I just want it to be in the ether. I want it to be a distributed website in this new way. So that's sort of a piece of it. It doesn't have authentication. It doesn't have some of these other pieces. For instance, it doesn't have an easy name system that you can easily type. It has these sort of long, awful names. But there's Namecoin. We're just talking with some folks from IPDB, which are building a distributed database system that's kind of like Bitcoin type underlying one, but can scale a lot faster. In terms of handling performance and versions, I would like to look to some of the institutions like the iSchool or Berkeley's libraries or the Internet Archive to play a role of providing perpetual access to living websites. So what would be really interesting from running an archives perspective is when we archive somebody's website, we would archive the running website itself, that it would have all of the code to be it. It's not snapshots of it, it's actually it. And by going and archiving it, we're helping participate in serving it to people, so if people wanted to have access to it, they would get it from us. So we would be blended into the web infrastructure in an interesting way, where right now you have people wanting to graduate, but their website is being used all the time. So how do you go and have that continue to be used? Well, it's got to be handed off to somebody. And often if you're a professor or a graduate student, if you finish a project, you would write up the paper, it would be put in the library, and the library would take care of going and making it available on a perpetual basis. That doesn't happen on the internet. If the graduate student wants to go on and do something else, then the site just comes down. And that's not good enough. How do we go and keep the work that has been done before in perpetuity and have it continue working? And you have institutions like the Internet Archive and universities and national libraries that can play a new and participatory role in serving our cultural heritage, not just snapshots of it, but really it. So I would say the idea of institutional organizations as well as ISPs would be interested in playing a role in serving a petabyte or so of current web data that would make it so that things would be faster and more reliable. Updates, but distributed. There's a system for going and making it so you can actually update things and know about it, which is actually pretty tricky in a distributed environment, but give me a hand wave for that it could be done. And we want a distributed identity system so that you can go and log in and make it so that you don't have to remember all these awful passwords, or you don't have to go and hand off all of your authentication to Google or Facebook, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just so inconvenient to try to remember all these passwords. Well, it's got to have a hash, or it has to have a number, or uppercase and lowercase, and it's got to be 9 characters now. It's like, And so we're really dying out there. So if there's a better system for authentication, and I'd say there is one that works, which is, I think one of the big things that Bitcoin has offered to the world is an example of an encryption system that a lot of people know how to use. Now, there may not be all that many places you can spend Bitcoin, right? But going and downloading a wallet it's magic in the encryption world. And it actually works so that you have a public and private key so that you sign all of your transactions. What if all of the pages that were written in the distributed web were also signed by who did it? Well, you'd have something pretty nifty. You'd actually have an ability to tip people because if you use your Bitcoin identity, you can actually pay people that way. But at least it would be an encrypted system that it hides all of the encryption from underneath it, but it also has secure identity in the sense that you can have a perpetual piece of identity. And if you want a different identity, because now you're at Berkeley and you don't want to use your home address, you can go and create other identities very smoothly and easily without centralized permissions. So I would say we have check marks in the big points. That we could build a WordPress but distributed, normal browser, good name, snappy performance, fun, easy, not relying on Facebook for your identity system. We could actually make it so you could tip people. And I think that if I were better at thinking about these architectures, you could actually go and encrypt something such that if somebody wants to unencrypt your movie or whatever, they would have to pay you to do so, and do that all in a distributed way that doesn't require your having an account with PayPal or Amazon or the like. And a big win from my perspective, and one of the major motivators for trying to push this forward, is we'd have an archivable and reliable system that actually keeps the living web living rather than just snapshots, dead snapshots of old websites. So on distributed web, I think we can have reliable, private, and fun. And we would lock the web open. In an interesting way, we would make openness irrevocable. We would make it so that the First Amendment is baked into the web itself. That we'd basically be constructing an architecture that would reflect what it is we want it to do. A distributed web, we can build this, and we can build this together. Thank you very much. There's going to be a workshop on this at the Internet Archive on June 8th. Vince Cerf is coming, and a number of the tech community. We're starting to shape sort of how this whole thing can come about. But please, questions, participation.
I think okay, I can do without that. Oh, thank you a lot. My pleasure. Adam Wolisz, UC Berkeley, ECS. One question. I would be interested in your comment on the balance between the storage of all the versions of the living evolvement of the web versus the right to forget and the right to erase. So how do you see this relation fundamentally?
This system makes it much more difficult to forget. By having versions and to have multiple people, it makes it harder to go back afterwards and say, oops, can I please just take that off of the living web? So we'll have to rely on our traditional mechanism of having people forget, which is being uninteresting. In general, the things are forgotten just by kind of not being current anymore. But the idea, if it's like really, really exciting and you want to take it away, this system would make that more difficult. So yes, it is a trade-off. And actually, in some sense, this would be a sacrifice to do. It would take some of the control away from the original publishers to go and make whole websites go away, which you can sort of say is good or bad. Right? It's both good and bad, but it does. It changes some of the dynamics if this system were to be really built. And I'd say we're a large part here because of a betrayal of trust. The World Wide Web and the Internet in general was built on underlying trust between a lot of players of not going and ripping people off. So if you're a search engine, you're not just going to go and take everybody else's content and start publishing it as your own, which actually is, maybe we're sort of where we are on that spectrum is a little bit interesting. But really the betrayal of trust that's been most demonstrated is what's going on in the national security area and also in companies just watching what it is everybody does. That I think we need to take some of the control back by the readers and the writers without as many intermediaries. That if we have basic infrastructure for going and having people connect much more directly, even though it's still going over an internet, it will mean that we'll pull back from some of the advantages that we've actually long enjoyed by having everything on Facebook to be able to be mushed around by that centralized company. But there's going to be a lot of us that are going to be uncomfortable with the world that we're currently building. So I'd say it's a trade-off. Bob.
Bob Glushko's high school. I like the idea, but when the government says, we don't want you to build this, Brewster, what do you tell them?
Oh, they haven't done that yet.
But they're going to.
Are they? So I think that I love new technologies. New technologies, whenever they come out, we get to learn about people's fears and desires. It's like a big Rorschach test. I don't know, Bitcoin is the most recent, right? And so there's the news technology, Bitcoin, and people say, oh, it's going to democratize the world, it's going to be awesome, I'm going to be able to finally get into college. I don't know, whatever it is, people's dreams are there. And then there's also but it's really horrible because it helps blank, and put in your favorite demon there. I think the idea of a distributed web would have that, if it caught on, it would have some of those same characteristics. And these technologies never live up to either the fears or the desires that we wanted. They're sort of like, oh, that's all the fax machine is? Oh, right, okay, cool. Or there's, that's the World Wide Web? I thought it was going to do, read those early Wired magazine articles, it's like, it's going to do this. It's like, it's doing nothing like it. And there's a wonderful book on by an MIT professor called Forecasting the Telephone. That was all the dreams and desires about telephones when they came out. So I don't know. I think that this system doesn't require cooperation from large organizations to build. There are lots of people that see the elephant in different ways. Vince Cerf is quite excited about it because he wants to make an enduring web. So for his perspective, I think the draw towards this is to make a permanent archivable, and also the Internet Archive's perspective. But I think a lot of people will come to it because, hey, maybe I can actually make money out there by going and taking my movies or music and selling more directly to people. If we build in some of these features, I think we'll see people come into it for different reasons. But there's nothing in these technologies that requires permission at the moment. Michael.
That was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. The only cognitive dissonance I have is the red check marks. Red means stop and check mark means go, and I'm totally stuck on that.
Damn, I hate to be around designers.
but I'm really inspired by this concept, and I wonder if there's a payment model that goes with it. So if for archiving something, we would be able to get some micro payments for each piece that we hold on to for somebody.
I think there are opportunities to do things in this next generation. And one of the possibilities for where to put it is in the names. So in the name place of where you get to see sort of whether it's brewstersblog.nl, or maybe there's certain types of names that would indicate what kind of site you're going to. And I think that's the opportunity to distinguish different types of sites, maybe based on features, like it's more reliable because somebody that's bought that name has bought somebody to go and archive it forever. That we are already using names, whether it's .com, .org, .edu, .gov, as ways of indicators, flags for what we're doing. I think we could go and use that as a mechanism of building a whole new set of business models around what you can expect by going there. And using names as a flagging system to help people aggregate around certain sets of principles. So I think there is an opportunity there.
Hi there, Nick Doty, UC Berkeley. Sometimes I sort of run into this problem that some people seem to think, oh, the World Wide Web is so successful. It must have been because Tim Berners-Lee was the first one to come up with this idea of hypertext. And as I'm sure you know, that wasn't the case at all. There are lots of different proposals for hypertext. And a lot of people suggest, well, maybe the reason that HTML and World Wide Web went out was actually the incredible simplicity of it.
Yes.
So a lot of people criticized at the time, oh, the links are only one way. There's no archiving built in. There's no security. There's no guarantee that the content will still be there. All of these things that actually were maybe advantages. And so I'm curious what you think, because I share your goal of wanting things to be archivable, but
so the
how
other
can we make something besides HTML still have this property of anyone can get on board and we can archive it?
You're absolutely right. We should look towards what made the other things successful over time. And Waze, which was a publishing system that came before Gopher and before the web, had a lot of these great features built in, but it was just too complicated. It wasn't flexible enough, and it eclipsed fairly quickly. Within a couple of years after the web really started to get going, Waze, the system I invented, died off. And the big lesson I came away with is it has to be stupid simple. Right? That was sort of that's why DOS worked. That's been the general meme for quite a while. The other aha, other than the booting old computers in your browser for me over the last couple of years, is Bitcoin. And again, I'm not trying to say Bitcoin, good, bad, or whatever, but it is anything but simple. This thing is a really wild set of technologies of encryption. It's got a peer-to-peer structure built into it, and it still works. It still works for millions of people, and it put a chink in that argument for me that it has to be really simple to work, to catch on. And this system is a lot more complicated. I mean, you could build a web server in Perl in an afternoon. That was one of its big winning points in 1993, is you could basically set one of these things up really quickly and easily. Going and building a distributed web has a JavaScript layer, a peer-to-peer structure. It's got a naming system. It is not simple. But a lot of the building blocks have come a long way. We've gotten the open source community to move a long way since the early 90s. The Waze was I used the open source and free software world as a playground in the early 90s to see how it worked. And it worked very well, but it was really nascent. It's quite mature now, so your building blocks are much larger to be able to play with. So I'm hopeful that this doesn't fall victim to just the "it's too complicated to live" argument. And as long as it has enough desirable components and it's easy enough for people to just start using, so it still works on your phone. You don't have to install something. It is built on top of the existing World Wide Web. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I don't know how this works.
Go.
It's a
Yeah.
weird situation.
You've got the mic.
Nick
Do it.
Merrill, iSchool. You mentioned about if you could archive the whole website, including the code that runs it. I feel like that works great as long as all the code is client-side. This is a very dry question, by the way.
Yes.
Works great if all the code is client-side, but I'm wondering about these situations where some of the code is external to the client. If we can still archive everything in those kind of situations.
Can't figure out how.
Yeah.
I really can't figure out how. We would thought, okay, we can use Drupal, or we can infer what the database behind something was by going and getting enough pieces of evidence of what it looked like. And it really requires cooperation back upstream, and cooperation requires interaction. And what we know is people throw away their privacy without thinking about it, and also people don't think about their own backups. So we have been frustrated in trying to figure out how to go and work back upstream to use server-side components. And so this is more on the client side, theoretically. But that was the reason why we're there.
Just a question about, have you thought about, would there be a change to how we find information? Like, would our search...
The search engines would still work because they'd crawl the web just the same way they would crawl the distributed web the same way they crawl current web. But actually the search engines will work better because the search engines can go and get the whole website. It can actually analyze the website because it can get it. Not, crawl it. Get it. And it could run a website within a virtual environment. So I think it's not only not going to be worse, I think it could be quite a bit better for helping navigate around these next generation websites. These next generation websites also don't have to just be dumb web pages. They can be active code. They can be video games. They can be fun things to interact with. And as we move into a more and more app-oriented world, where Google Docs or these very complicated systems, this I think is going to be more important for search engines than sort of our page-oriented structure that we've kind of grown used to, but may not be with us for that long. Oh.
Hi, Brewster.
Yes. Good to see you.
So one
the
of the
first
things
exec director of the Internet Archive.
I love this idea, particularly around the privacy. And what is your vision around, I go to, in essence, a commercial website. Maybe I buy something, maybe I don't, whatever. And right now, no matter what I do, just about, they're just tracking me, they're bombarding me, they're driving me nuts.
Yes.
How does that aspect get addressed in this new world?
I'm hoping we make it so that it's a lot easier if you wanted to, let Amazon, right? Actually, I sold a company to Amazon and actually did very well out of the stock on that particular purchase, which is very helpful. But I think the reason why they're so successful is they're getting a winner-takes-all type advantage. That the technology has gotten this winner-takes-all sort of monopolization, de facto monopolization. And how do we combat that? You can combat that with regulatory issues, but we've seen how effective the antitrust department has been over the last 20 years in the United States government. Or we can try to make it so that it's easier to win by being small. And Amazon, it's really hard to sell something. It's really hard to go and make a business go at these. And people just know to trust Amazon.com. So distributing trust, that's harder, but distributing technology might be possible. So can we make it so that there are smaller functions that do some of the functions that we've come to really enjoy out of Amazon or Facebook or Twitter, but based on smaller components? Uber or Lyft, those are really taking advantage of scale and just having one place, no matter where you are, you can go there. But imagine a more federated approach. Can we get those to work? They typically are harder to make work. Decentralized systems are harder to make work than centralized systems, but they have some advantages. So if we can go and, especially in the nonprofit or the educational worlds that aren't as needing to go and get hockey stick valuations from VCs, where we actually just want to build a system and a society that works better, maybe we can go and take some of the examples that are coming out of these large de facto monopolies, build components that allow people to go and make distributed versions of these. And that's, I think, a good role for the nonprofit and the educational and the government structures to go and try to build more level playing fields. Otherwise, I think we're going to end up with very few, very, very big players.
So I'm wondering, is this option on? There's a sort of a situation going on right now. It seems as though there's sort of a war between different browsers and different operating systems that they won't let you have various access to various various content unless you can prove that you have your latest operating system and your browser is up to date. And they claim a lot of it, I think, came from the fact that they found bugs in the very core infrastructure of some of the things that they've built a lot of stuff on, and so they turn off Java. You can't use it unless you have the most recent. How can you create a complex system that doesn't run those kind of risks of actually ending up taking things away from people rather than giving them to them?
Yeah, there are wars going on in operating systems and browsers, but I haven't heard the word browser war for a really long time. And I think because we've actually gotten some standards that make it so that certain things work pretty well. If we can live on top of existing standards, so when I looked at this type of thing, is there a way of making it so that it's not built on top of anything special? So that if Wells Fargo needs it, which they need JavaScript, then the iPhone is going to have a really hard time going and discriminating against a distributed peer-to-peer system if it's using the same technologies that people that they can't afford to offend. You're shaking your head. Okay, go again. Come on, hit it. They can't turn off JavaScript. They can turn off Java, and they have, But they can't turn off JavaScript because it's too useful in things like Google Docs. Google Docs would stop working. And there would be, people would just migrate away. They couldn't. So if we build on things that other people have already done, maybe this is a little bit to Bob's point of how are they going to shut this sort of thing down if they don't like it, is if we build on systems that are required to make systems work for people they can't afford to offend, then we might have a better shot. That's at least the design. That's the design criteria.
Nick Merrill again. This goes back to this question and also to Bob's. Aren't you sometimes concerned about them shutting down WebRTC? It seems like WebRTC might be one of the things that really makes this tick. And I mean...
Yes. Let's use it for all sorts of good things. So basically, WebRTC can be used as a Skype replacement. So it's basically peer-to-peer oriented video conferencing. So it's starting to be used more, but let's use it for a lot of things. And then it's going to be more difficult to take it away. I'll keep going until you, but at some point you're going to time out.
10 minutes.
Okay. What do you guys think? I mean, this is not your typical talk where it's like, oh, hey, I've got this thing to sell you. It's a bit more of a direction of if we work together, and it's going to be kind of hard, we can go and solve incrementally, but then we have a perfectly reasonable goal towards building a better web for at least a large number of users. Marlita.
Yeah, so what do you suggest as the first small baby steps? How do we get going?
So I gave this talk at the Chaos Communications Camp, which is this hacker community camp in Berlin last summer. And some of the, folks with the same gray hair that Bob and I have said, think a couple chess moves ahead. So what would you do now to make it so that you're more likely to win? And I'd say actually there are these small projects that are underfunded to go and build some of these components in a distributed way. Maybe we can work together with those. But I think we can go and pull together visionaries and the like to go and say, why should this type of structure exist? So that it's trying to ward against the attacks of it's going to be really helpful to blank, where blank is bad. And so how do we go and flesh out the idea of the use cases? And this is probably not even the right proposal shape. But we now know that the World Wide Web has got a deep problem to it. And I worry about the future of open. We're seeing things, just the iPhone itself is locked on lots of different levels. You only get apps on there if Apple approves it. Changing the operating system is called jailbreaking. Jeez. The network itself spies on you at all times. So we've got a system that it's got some brokenness that's being very, very popular. So I don't actually take the World Wide Web as a given. It may be surpassed and replaced with something that's a lot less open and free than what it is we've come to assume. So I'm going to throw myself at it, and to the extent that the Internet Archive, to try to find a place for the Internet Archive to play a role. And maybe we try to find more institutional roles. Why would this be a winner to more players? And that way we can get some more people not only being defending it, but building it. Bob?
I guess I'm concerned that this is almost too late, because I find it so offensive. I go to a website, and the first thing it says is, let me download my apps to own everything on your platform around this. So the appification movement is sort of the opposite of the distributed movement here, where we want to put everything should have a wall around it. And that seems to be winning. I mean, the web is far less open than it was 5 years ago, because we've got 75 million apps trying to own a corner of it.
It's true. It's true. And when I talk to my phone, which I do, and Siri sort of talks back to me and says, oh, gosh, I'm sorry, I can't figure out the answer. I'm going to dump you on the web. I think she's got a little sort of defeatism in her voice as she said, I'm sorry, I can't figure it out. I'm going to have to dump you into a search engine, right? That's not good enough. We're going to need the open world to get to be as good and keep moving along. So maybe it's setting the sights too low. Maybe it's too late. Maybe we should be shooting for a slightly different goal. But I think now is a good time to think of how we should build this technology to serve ourselves better. And I think Berkeley can play a big role in this type of thing. It is still a state institution. It still has, it is still Berkeley. And there's people, the Silicon Valley is still not dominated by just a few big players. Little ideas can take off. So if you find a mechanism to make something where lots of people see positive things, whether it's gold or positive political behavior or being able to do something else in your world a little bit better, we're still in a place that you can invent and create and make new things happen without a permission-based system. And let's take advantage of that period of time that we've got now.
Could you parse out some more? Oh, go ahead.
Back here, hi. So how does the distributed web handle the seedy underbelly? So right now, local law enforcement is heavily dependent on web services to find child pornography websites. How do we address it here?
They'd be able to find them.
But
because, you know, they would be available.
Finding the people who host the information is reliant on that ISP, that server-specific information. So how do we find it if we're distributing a site across a cloud of computers?
You can find the materials. What's not as easy is making it go away. So if you wanted to go and what a lot of systems right now are relying on is intermediaries. So they don't actually try to find the person doing it. They just try to find somebody that they're dependent on, and then they go and muscle those people. This system would take more of those pieces out. So you'd actually have to start going back to finding the people that actually did it and prosecuting them, which actually I think would be a win. I mean, the idea of going and having your website shut down, not because your website's illegal, but because somebody else can go and get your DNS record pulled, seems wrong to me. Right? There's a lot of things that are going on by going for intermediaries. Maybe we should just go back to there's culpable and there's laws. And yes, it may be trickier to find people in this world, maybe a little bit more like how it used to work with the print world. But we lived in the print world for centuries, and it still seemed to work.
So I think this is a really cool idea. But I have what you just said triggered a question in my mind, which is, how does a DMCA takedown notice work in this environment? So if I'm a bona fide rights holder and my content is being hosted, can I issue a takedown?
Well, there's who would you issue a takedown to?
Right.
And there are going to be hosting sites like the Internet Archive gets takedown notices all the time. And we go through a process that was actually derived here at the iSchool to figure out which things should be taken off and why and when. And so I think that those sorts of things will continue to happen. But it'll be sort of, you know, there'll be major hosting sites, but then there'll be still smaller mechanisms for more of the peer-to-peer things where it's going to be more difficult to figure out how to get every last shred of things gone.
Well, you never
and what we found is mostly people are just interested in having the bulk things gone. So this isn't a panacea where there's going to be no controls, or panacea or hell or whatever it is, how you ever see these things. But it will shift some of the dynamics somewhat if it catches on.
Okay, cool. Because I don't think the government's going to be the one who has a problem with it. I think it might be Sony if it were something like that. And I think Sony's a lot more dangerous than the federal government with regards to new technology.
Well, thank you very much.